These are 10 cooking methods that kept pioneer families alive when the wood ran out, the coal cart never came, and the nearest town was 3 days away on horseback. And not one of them required a single match. By the mid-1800s, roughly 300,000 settlers had made the crossing along the Oregon Trail. Most wagons carried only a few weeks of firewood. After that, they cooked or they didn't eat. What they figured out in those desperate, exhausted miles shaped every survival technique we talk about today. 1. Buffalo chip fires. On the Great Plains, trees were almost non-existent. Settlers quickly discovered what the Plains tribes had known for generations. Dried bison dung burned slow, hot, and nearly smokeless. Women and children walked ahead of the wagons, collecting chips into aprons and sacks. A single day's haul could fuel an entire evening meal. Journals from westward crossing families described the chips burning so cleanly that bread baked over them tasted no different from bread cooked over oak. Disgust gave way to survival. That's always how it went. 2. The haybox cooker. This technique was so effective that it was still being used in both world wars. The idea is simple. Bring your pot to a full boil over whatever heat you have. Animal dung, a handful of twigs, anything. Then seal it inside a box packed tight with hay, cloth, or dried grass. The insulation traps the heat, and the food keeps cooking for hours without another flame. Beans, stews, and porridges that would normally need 90 minutes of fuel needed only 15. Pioneer homesteaders on the northern plains used haybox cookers through entire winters, conserving every scrap of fuel for warmth. 3. Pit cooking. Dig a hole about 2 feet deep and 2 feet wide. Line it with stones. Build a fire inside and let it burn for 2 to 3 hours until those stones are radiating heat from their cores. Clear out the embers, lower in your wrapped meat or covered pot, pack earth and sod over the top, and walk away. Come back 6 to 8 hours later. What comes out is fully cooked, tender, and still hot. Native American tribes across the continent used pit cooking long before European settlers arrived, and the settlers who survived the hardest winters were often the ones who learned from them. 4. Solar reflector cooking. In the high desert and the open Southwest, sun was the one resource that never ran out. Pioneers built parabolic reflectors from salvaged tin and polished sheet metal, focusing sunlight onto a single point hot enough to boil water and bake bread. A properly built solar reflector can reach 250 degrees Fahrenheit on a clear day. Missionaries traveling through Arizona and New Mexico in the 1860s documented solar cooking as a regular practice among both settlers and indigenous communities in areas where wood was too scarce to burn. 5. Dutch oven ember cooking. The cast iron Dutch oven is one of the most important tools in American frontier history, and when used right, it needs almost no fuel at all. Pack a bed of coals beneath the oven and pile a shallow layer on the lid. The iron holds and distributes heat so efficiently that a fire built from a single armful of brush could sustain a full bake. Pioneer women became extraordinarily skilled at reading coal temperature by color and timing. Recipes passed down through frontier families didn't list degrees, they listed coal counts. 6. Peat and dung bricks. In the upper Midwest and across the homesteads of Kansas and Nebraska, settlers cut blocks of dried peat from riverbanks and stacked them like bricks for winter fuel. Where even peat was scarce, dried cattle and horse dung was formed into compact blocks, sometimes mixed with straw to improve burn time. Homestead diaries from the 1870s describe families spending entire autumn weeks cutting, drying, and stacking these blocks against the coming cold. It was unglamorous, exhausting work. It also kept them alive and heated in the winter cold nights. 7. Beanhole cooking. They say the breakfast, it's the most important meal of the day. The old frontier people used to put a cast iron pot filled with dried beans, salt pork, and water, sealed tight and buried in a preheated hole at sundown. By morning, the beans were fully cooked and ready to eat, having simmered overnight on residual earth heat alone. Logging camps along the northern frontier made beanhole cooking a weekly ritual, feeding dozens of men on fuel that had burned itself out hours before dawn. 8. Hot stone cooking. Fire the stones, lose the fire. That's the logic, and it's one of the oldest cooking principles on Earth. Heat a collection of dense river stones. Basalt and granite work best, never sandstone or shale, which crack and explode under extreme heat. In whatever fire you can sustain. Let them sit in the coals for a full hour until they're radiating heat from their cores. Then transfer them directly into a vessel filled with water. The water reaches a rolling boil in minutes. Drop in your meat, your greens, your grain. As each stone cools, swap it out for a fresh one from the coals. The cycle keeps going long after the last flame has gone dark, holding cooking temperatures for 2 to 3 hours without a single additional piece of fuel. Stone selection was the critical skill. Porous or layered rocks hold moisture inside their structure, and when superheated, that moisture turns to steam. The stone doesn't crack, it detonates. Settlers who learned from the Plains tribes knew exactly which stones to use and where to find them. Archaeological evidence places this method across North America for at least 10,000 years. The settlers who made it through the hardest winters rarely reinvented the wheel. They paid attention to the people who had already solved the problem. 9. Ash and ember. Baking. When the fire burns down to white ash, the cooking isn't over. Bury dense root vegetables directly in the ash and embers. Potatoes, turnips, parsnips. Wrap meat in wet clay or green leaves and nestle it in the same bed. The retained heat in deep ash can sustain cooking temperatures for 2 to 3 hours after the last visible flame. Frontier bakers wrapped raw dough in cabbage leaves and buried it the same way. The result was a dense, smoky bread that needed zero active fuel. Survival cooking doesn't wait for perfect conditions. It can turn into a life or death situation very fast. 10. The retained heat rock oven. Built from fieldstone and clay mortar, these ovens absorbed heat from a single sustained fire, then released it slowly over the next 6 to 12 hours. One fire, one full day of cooking. Bread, roasted meat, dried herbs, rendered fat, all processed in sequence as the oven cooled from its peak down through its range. Families who built these ovens could feed themselves through an entire winter week on a single afternoon's worth of gathered fuel. Every one of these methods was born from the same pressure, not innovation for its own sake, but survival with what was at hand. The settlers who made it through didn't have better equipment. They had better knowledge. And most of that knowledge they learned from people who had been living off this land for thousands of years before they arrived. That knowledge didn't disappear. It just got buried under 2 centuries of convenience. And now, you know where to dig. So if you enjoy our channel content, be sure to like and subscribe and don't miss any of the new videos. Thanks for watching.